That morning in Pine Hollow started the way most ordinary days begin. A little chill in the air, the smell of pine needles warming on the ground, the kind of soft light that makes the world feel almost kind. No one there expected to hear a bobcat cry like a broken heart, and no one expected that cry to lead them to an old bag that would make grown adults scream when they saw what was inside. Evelyn Moore didn't wake up looking for an inspirational story. She just wanted a quiet walk. She'd packed the same metal thermos she'd used for years, slipped her feet into the same sturdy trail shoes, and driven the same two-lane road out to Pine Hollow Canyon on the northern edge of Arizona. The canyon wasn't dramatic enough for postcards. It was just steady. A narrow cut through the land, lined with ponderosa pines and scrub, a dry creek bed winding through the middle like a forgotten promise. For Evelyn, that was exactly what she needed. Not fireworks, not fairy tales, just steady. Her older brother, Jake, walked beside her, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. A few steps behind them was Max, Jake's grandson, long-legged and restless, grown now, still half-connected to his phone even out here in the trees. They moved without hurry. Gravel crunched under their boots. Somewhere upslope, a jay scolded the world just for existing. Evelyn's breath fogged in the cool air. She liked the rhythm of it. Step, exhale. Step, exhale. Something in that pattern kept the sharper thoughts away. Since her husband passed, Pine Hollow had become the one place where the mail couldn't find her. No insurance letters, no quiet notices about changes to the mortgage, no missed calls from her daughter that turned into long text messages with too many words and not enough understanding. Out here it was just rock, trees, and three people who, for all their differences, still chose to walk the same path. Storm coming later, Jake said, glancing at the thin band of cloud on the horizon. Good for the trees, Evelyn answered. Max didn't say much. He was filming bits of the trail, maybe for a short video he'd never actually edit. Evelyn didn't mind. Everyone carried their own way of seeing the world. If you had paused that moment and asked her what she expected from the day, she might have said, a little exercise, some fresh air, maybe a happy memory of coffee on the overlook with her brother. Instead, they got a sound that did not belong to any peaceful morning. It came from somewhere ahead, around a bend where the canyon walls pulled closer together. At first, it was faint, almost like the creak of an old tree. Then it rose, thin and sharp, and all three of them stopped at the same time. Max lowered his phone. Jake turned his head, listening. Evelyn felt the hair lift on the back of her neck. The cry came again. It wasn't a normal bobcat call. It wasn't the rough, coughing bark people sometimes hear at night and mistake for something worse. It wasn't the yip of a coyote or the high keening of a hawk. It sounded wrong. There was a quiver in it, a break in the middle, like a voice catching on a sob. It started small and then tore upward, filling the canyon, bouncing off rock and pine until it felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. Max's face went pale. Is that a person? He asked. Evelyn didn't answer. She couldn't. Not at first. The sound had gone straight past her ears and lodged itself deep in the part of her that still woke up at 3 in the morning, reaching for a body that wasn't there. The last time she'd heard anything like it was the night she tried to pack up her husband's winter coats. She'd folded one, then another, and then a third, and something broke loose inside her chest. The sound that came out of her that night hadn't sounded like her voice. It had sounded borrowed, too old, too deep, full of emotions she'd kept pressed down and out of the way. This call in Pine Hollow felt like that. She realized she'd tightened her grip on her trekking pole. Her knuckles were white. Jake cleared his throat. Could be somebody hurt, he said. Or a fawn caught in something. Evelyn knew that was the practical thing to say. This was ranching country, logging country. People got themselves into trouble on these side trails. Animals did too. It would make sense that this was just another little crisis in the wild. But that sound didn't feel like just another anything. It felt soulful. It felt like a loss. They listened again. The next cry came lower, a broken moan that rose and wavered like someone trying not to fall apart. There was a kind of loyalty in it too, although that's not a word most people would use for an animal's voice. It sounded like whatever was making that noise was refusing to let go of something, even if holding on hurt. Max took a half step forward. "We should check, right? In case it's someone?" "Stay behind me," Jake said. "We'll go slow." Evelyn nodded, but her body was already moving. The nurse in her hadn't retired, no matter what the paperwork said. She knew that when someone, or something, cried like that, you didn't stay on the sidelines. As they walked toward the sound, the canyon seemed to narrow around them. The light shifted, slipping through branches in thin silver ribbons. Their footsteps sounded louder. Even Max had put his phone away now. The cry came again. Closer, this time, sharper. It slid right under Evelyn's ribs and settled there. You may know that feeling. The way a song on the radio can pull you back 20 years in 3 seconds. The way the smell of a certain soap can suddenly make your eyes sting. Our hearts remember things our minds are trying to forget. Sometimes it only takes one unexpected sound to open everything up again. This is a story about a bobcat, yes, but it's also a heartwarming story about how far loyalty will go when love has nowhere else to live. It's about how even a wild animal can carry someone's memory the way we carry old letters or faded photographs. And like a lot of the quiet moral stories life gives us, it doesn't announce itself with a big lesson. It just walks toward you on a cool morning when you thought you were only out for exercise. Evelyn, Jake, and Max rounded the bend where the canyon walls pinched tighter. The trail dipped down slightly. Fallen branches lay scattered across the path, a tangle of gray wood and dried needles. The sound stopped. Silence can be just as loud as any scream. For a moment, all they heard was the tick of cooling metal from a distant truck on the highway and the faint rush of wind high above them. Then they saw him, sprawled in a patch of dust and broken brush, fur clotted with dirt, body wrapped around an old Navy duffel bag as if it were something alive, lay a full-grown bobcat. His eyes were wide and wet. His paws were hooked deep into the fabric. Every breath shook his ribs. Not attacking, not stalking, just holding. Whatever they thought they knew about wild animals, about how they behave and what they feel, loosened a little in that moment. The bobcat wasn't fighting for food. He was clinging to a bag like it was the last piece of his world. Evelyn felt her throat close. There was something almost human in the way he pressed his face into the canvas, like a person hugging an old jacket that still holds a familiar scent. The canyon might as well have vanished. It was just her, this creature, and the shared understanding that sometimes the only thing keeping you upright is a thing you refuse to let go of. If you're already feeling a little tug in your chest, that's all right. This isn't a fast story. It's a gentle, soulful one, meant to unfold the way light moves across a canyon wall, slowly, with a kind of kindness for the things it touches. In a moment, more people will arrive. People who have seen a lot of wild animals, a lot of accidents, and more than their share of grief. They'll try to help this bobcat. They'll try to take that bag away because they think it's the safest thing to do. And when they finally open it, they'll scream. Not from fear, but from the shock of recognizing what love and loyalty can look like when life doesn't go the way we hope. For now, though, it's just you, Evelyn, and the sound of a bobcat who has cried himself silent. If you've ever held on to something a little too long because it reminded you of someone you loved, you might find a piece of yourself in this story. Stay with them for the next part. Take one slow breath. We're about to see what happens when a wild heart refuses to let go of a very human bag. By the time Evelyn's mind caught up with what her eyes were seeing, she'd already stopped breathing. There, in the thin band of shade beside the trail, lay the bobcat. He wasn't the sleek, silent predator you see in wildlife calendars. His fur was dulled with dust, his sides heaving, and wrapped beneath him, pinned tight against his chest, was an old Navy duffel bag with one torn strap. He held it the way a person might hold a pillow that still smells like someone they loved. For a long moment, nobody moved. Max whispered first, barely louder than the wind. "Is he hugging it?" Evelyn didn't answer. Jake didn't either, because that's what it looked like. A wild bobcat, claws sunk into canvas, chin pressed against a bag. His ears were flattened, not in the sharp, forward way of a hunter, but in that helpless way you see in an animal that expects pain. Every breath shuddered through him. When he shifted just a little, they saw his paws flex, digging deeper, as if he thought the bag might vanish if he loosened his grip. Then came the sound again. Not the sharp cry they had heard earlier, not the canyon-filling wail. This time, it was smaller. A thin, broken whimper that slipped out between clenched teeth. His mouth opened just enough. The sound trembled once, and then faded. Evelyn's hand found her chest without her really deciding to put it there. Most of us grow up with a simple picture of wild animals. They hunt, they sleep, they run when they're scared. We're told not to give them human feelings, not to turn them into cartoon characters or fairy tales. And that's true. Bobcats are bobcats. They don't write poems or send messages. But living things do have attachments. They know safety. They know loss in their own way. Anyone who's watched a dog wait by a door that will never open again knows that kind of loyalty doesn't belong only to people. Whatever this bobcat was feeling, it came off him in waves. "Don't go closer," Jake said quietly. Max had already leaned in a few inches, the way curious minds do. There was kindness under it. The sort that wants to rush in and fix things. The bag was scuffed and stained. The kind you might toss in the back of a truck for a weekend trip. One zipper pull was missing. She took in the scene the way a nurse does, almost without meaning to. Breathing too fast. Ribs showing under the fur. Dried mud on the paws. A faint stickiness near one shoulder that might have been old blood. Dehydration, exhaustion, and under all of it, that fierce, unyielding grip on the duffel. The host explained that bobcats are solitary, secretive. They don't waste energy in broad daylight unless they have to. When they guard something, it's usually food they've cached or a den site, not some human-made object dragged into the open. This scene broke all those tidy rules. As they watched, the bobcat's eyes flicked up and met Evelyn's. For just a heartbeat, there was nothing wild about that gaze. It was a look that seemed to say as clear as any words, "Don't take this from me. This is all I have." Evelyn thought of a cardboard box in her own closet. Inside, a work badge on an old lanyard, a watch that no longer ticked, the last book her husband had been reading, bookmark still in place. She understood in that instant why this scene felt so wrong and so familiar at the same time. Max shifted his weight, a small slide of gravel under his boot. The bobcat reacted like someone had fired a gun. He shot up, muscles coiling. The scream that tore out of him this time was bigger, more desperate. His whole body moved, dragging the duffel a few inches through the dirt, claws ripping tracks that cut across the trail. Max stumbled backward. Evelyn flinched. Jake stepped sideways, instinctively angling himself between the animal and the people he loved, one arm half extended, not to push anybody, just to remind them where the line was. The bobcat didn't lunge beyond the bag. He didn't charge. He stayed over that canvas like a shield, every hair standing on end, lips peeled back, breath soared in and out. His eyes were wide with pure, unfiltered terror. "Okay," Jake breathed. "We're not touching it. We're backing away." There is a difference between an animal that wants to attack and an animal that is defending something it can't bear to lose. Even without training, your body knows that difference. It's there in the angle of the back, the direction of the eyes, the way the claws grip, not forward, but down. Evelyn eased herself a step back, then another. "Max, call someone," she said. "Game and fish, forest service, I don't care. Somebody who knows what they're doing." He already had his phone out, hands shaking just enough to make the screen blur. The signal flickered, then caught. He spoke quickly, voice wobbling as he tried to explain a bobcat that cried like a person and wouldn't let go of a bag. While he talked, Evelyn noticed something she hadn't seen at first. On the fur of the bobcat's face, just below his eyes, were two faint, clean streaks where the dust didn't cling. In the sharp, bright light, they were easy to miss. But once you saw them, you couldn't unsee them. Like the tracks dried tears leave on a tired face. Biologists might debate whether animals cry the way we do. Tears can be about irritation, not emotions. But standing there, looking at this worn-out bobcat in the bag pressed under his chest, Evelyn wasn't thinking about scientific papers. She was thinking about all the times she'd wiped her own face with the back of her hand and pretended nothing was wrong. She found herself whispering, almost without sound, "I'm sorry." Not because she'd hurt him, but because she recognized that kind of pain, and there was nothing she could do in that moment to make it stop. The dispatcher's voice on Max's phone crackled through the still air. He repeated their location, described the duffel, the animal, and the way it screamed whenever anyone got near the bag. The operator told them to stay back, stay calm, and wait. Rangers were on their way. Waiting isn't easy when every instinct says, "Fix this now." But sometimes, kindness looks like stepping away, not stepping in. So they did the only thing they could. They gave the bobcat space. They stood at a distance where he could see them but not feel cornered. They talked in low voices, not about themselves, but about him. Max whispered that maybe the bag had belonged to someone's scout. That's what he started calling him, quietly, as if naming the bobcat might help. Had known. Jake said he'd seen loyal dogs lie on their owner's grave for days. This felt like the wild version of that same love. Evelyn just watched. Every twitch, every breath, every small motion of paw on canvas. If you've ever sat beside someone in pain, knowing you can't fix the cause, but you can keep them company until help arrives, you know the kind of helpless, aching loyalty that settled over that little group on the trail. It's not flashy. It doesn't look like a big, heroic act. But it's real. This is where the story begins to shift from strange to soulful. In a little while, people with training and tranquilizers and plans will arrive. They'll see the same thing Evelyn is seeing, but through different eyes. They'll recognize certain patterns, certain signs. They'll also make a choice that will change everything. They'll decide they have to get that bag away from this crying bobcat if they're going to save his life. And that choice will come at a price. For now, if your heart feels a little tight for this wild creature clinging to his one treasured object, you're in the right place. Take a breath with them. Imagine the coolness of the pine-shadowed air, the smell of dust and needles, the quiet hum of a canyon standing witness. In the next part, the ranger truck will pull up, and a man who has his own history with loss will step out. He'll look at Scout, at the duffel, at the tears in the fur, and he'll know this isn't just an animal control call. If you want to keep walking with them and see what happens when someone finally tries to take that bag away, stay close. This story is just beginning to open. By the time the ranger truck rolled into Pine Hollow, the morning had lost that clean, easy feeling it started with. The air was still cool. The light was still soft, but something had settled over the canyon now. A heaviness, like the land itself knew it was holding a story that wasn't finished. Evelyn heard the engine before she saw the vehicle. A low, steady growl, tires crunching over gravel at the trailhead. It sounded strangely comforting, the way an ambulance siren can feel like kindness when you're waiting beside someone in pain. A few minutes later, a green state truck eased around the last curve of the access road and stopped. The door opened, and Ranger Justice Cole stepped out. He didn't come crashing in with loud orders. He just took off his sunglasses, squinted once at the sun, and then let his gaze move slowly down the trail to where Evelyn, Jake, and Max waited. "Everybody all right?" he called, voice even. Evelyn nodded. "We're fine," she said. "He's not." She stepped aside so Justice could see. From where he stood, he could just make out the shape. The bobcat stretched over the duffel bag, fur raised, paws locked in place. Even at that distance, he could hear the low, broken sound rumbling out of Scout's chest. Justice felt something in his stomach go tight. He'd heard that sound before. Years earlier, in another canyon not too far from this one, there had been a flash flood. A line of storms had stalled over the foothills, sending water down dry washes like a wall of mud. Justice had responded with the rest of his crew, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. They'd found cars turned sideways, coolers hanging in trees, a single shoe jammed into a crack in the rocks, and one woman, clinging to a boulder in the middle of the water, her voice raw from shouting. He'd done everything he could. Rope, anchor, hand over hand, but the current had been faster. Years later, he could still hear the tone her voice reached when she realized she couldn't hold on anymore. It wasn't just fear, it was that same note of grief, a life tearing away from what it loved. He'd carried that sound with him ever since, folded into an incident report in his glove box, tucked behind his ribs in the quiet hours. It was why, when the radio call came this morning, distressed bobcat, unusual vocalizing, guarding a bag. Something inside him had sat up and listened. Now, hearing Scout cry over that duffel, Justice knew this wasn't an ordinary bobcat encounter. He moved down the trail with careful steps, boots scuffing gently. Behind him came another vehicle, smaller, with a woman and a younger ranger climbing out. "Harper Diaz, wildlife medic," the woman said as she caught up. "That's Frankie with the kit." She didn't ask a lot of questions. She just followed Justice's eyes to the scene. Up close, the smell of pine gave way to something sharper. Dust, sweat, a faint metallic tang that might have been old blood. Scout's coat was rough with dried mud. His sides heaved in shallow, rapid breaths. The duffel under him looked heavier than it had any right to be given its size. Harper knelt slowly, staying just outside the range of those claws. Her voice dropped into the tone people use in recovery rooms and animal wards. Low, steady, almost like a song without music. "Hey there," she breathed. "You've had a time, haven't you?" Scout's ears twitched toward her. His paws tightened on the canvas. Frankie hovered a few steps back, clutching the equipment bag. This was the kind of scene that didn't look real, even when you were standing in it. A wild bobcat, tears carving lines through the dust on his face, pressing himself down over a human bag like a parent shielding a child. Harper's eyes narrowed. "See the way he's wrapped around it?" she murmured to Justice. "That's guarding, but it's different. Not food, not territory." Justice nodded. "He screams whenever someone gets near it," he said. "They said the sound made the hair stand up on their arms." Harper watched Scout's chest rise and fall. "He's exhausted," she said. "Borderline dehydrated. If he keeps this up, he's going to crash." Evelyn shifted her weight, the gravel crunching softly under her boots. "Can't you just sedate him? Let him sleep?" Harper shook her head slightly. "In this state, the tranquilizer might drop him too hard too fast," she said. "His system is already running hot. We could stop his breathing if we're careless." Justice felt the weight of choices stack up in front of him, one on top of another. He'd stood in this place before. One move could save, or it could haunt you for years. He crouched down slowly, making his body smaller in Scout's field of view. He kept his hands where the bobcat could see them. "Look at his paws," he said quietly to Harper. "He's not reaching out. He's holding on." It was true. The claws weren't extended forward in attack. They were curved down into the canvas, anchoring Scout in place. He wasn't trying to push anyone away. He was trying to keep something close. "Something's in that bag," Harper said. "Something that matters to him more than his own comfort." We tend to think of wildlife stories as simple. Predator and prey, survival and hunger. But now and then, a scene breaks through that narrow framing and shows us something else entirely. A kind of loyalty we don't have easy words for. Not human love, exactly, but a fierce attachment that lives in the same neighborhood. As Justice watched Scout, a thought came to him. Not a scientific one, just a human one. Who did you lose? He wondered. What's in that bag that feels like your whole world? He'd seen people do this. Cling to a jacket, a cap, a faded photograph. Tuck a hospital bracelet into a drawer. Keep a mug by the sink, long after its owner is gone. Sometimes the smallest object ends up holding all the emotions we can't bear to set down. Maybe this bobcat wasn't so different. Harper straightened slowly.
If we wait for him to let go on his own, she said, we might lose him. But if we just grab the bag, he could injure his neck, his chest, everything.
He'll fight until he has nothing left. Justice exhaled through his nose. So we need to take the fear away, he said, not just the bag. He glanced back at Frankie. Get the padded pole. We'll do this slowly. Frankie swallowed and nodded, fingers fumbling briefly with the latch on the equipment bag. His hands weren't as steady as Harper's or Justice's, but he moved anyway. Sometimes courage doesn't look like charging forward. It looks like taking one more step, even when your legs feel like sand. Justice shifted his weight lower, letting his knees sink into the dust. He kept his voice soft. Easy, boy, he murmured. I'm not here to hurt you. Scout's gaze flicked toward him, pupils wide, breath shuddering. That soulful, grief-struck look was back, a pleading look if you let yourself see it that way. We're going to help you, Justice went on. Whether Scout understood the words didn't matter. What mattered was the tone, the same one people use when they sit beside a hospital bed and speak not just to the body under the blanket, but to all the years behind it. Harper eased the catch pole out, the loop slack, her movements small and patient. She positioned herself at an angle where Scout would see Justice first, not her. On your word, she whispered. Justice nodded. He took one more breath, steadying himself. He remembered the flood, remembered the feeling of ropes slick with rain, of water tugging at his legs, remembered promising himself that if he ever stood at a crossroads like that again, he would err on the side of kindness, even if it scared him. Okay, he said quietly. Now. Harper moved. The metal touched Scout's fur with the lightest pressure, but it was enough. He exploded upward, that awful cry ripping out of him again, louder than before, full of all the emotions his body hadn't had words for. Dust burst into the air. The duffel shifted. The loop of the pole slipped around his neck, tightening just enough to keep him from lunging forward, not enough to choke. Frankie! Harper shouted, bracing her feet, arms straining as Scout thrashed. The bag! Frankie hesitated, just a heartbeat, and then rushed in, reaching for the torn strap. For a second, everything in Pine Hollow held its breath. This is the moment where the story leans over the edge. When people try to take a bag from a crying bobcat, thinking they're doing the right thing, when all the love and loyalty wrapped up in that animal's body meets all the good intentions and old regrets wrapped up in the humans. If your shoulders are tight right now, if your own memories of trying to help and wishing you'd done it differently are stirring, it's okay. You're not alone in that feeling. In the next part, we'll see what happens when Frankie pulls, when Scout fights, and when the zipper finally opens. We'll see why the people standing around that tailgate will never forget what they saw inside that bag. For now, take one slow, kind breath with them. The hardest part is just ahead. For a second, time in Pine Hollow split into two parts. There was the moment before Frankie pulled the bag away from the bobcat, and the moment after. When it finally happened, it wasn't graceful. Frankie grabbed the torn strap. Harper braced with the catch pole, muscles shaking as Scout thrashed and cried. Justice stepped in, hands on the other side of the duffel. Now, he said through his teeth. The strap gave. Canvas scraped across rock. Scout clawed for it one last time, his paws raking deep grooves in the dirt. The sound that ripped out of him then was different from all the others. Not wild, not threatening, just pure loss, raw and breaking. Evelyn flinched. Max's eyes flooded. Even Jake looked away. And then, suddenly, it was over. The bag was in Justice's hands. Scout's body hit the ground, all fight going out of him at once. He lay there trembling, a low, hoarse whine grinding out of his chest until it faded into silence. Harper eased the pressure on the pole, voice low, soothing, promising a kind of safety he couldn't yet feel. Justice looked down at the duffel. It felt heavier than it had any right to be, not just in weight, in meaning. "Let's get this up to the truck," he said quietly. They carried it the way people carry something they're not sure they want to know the truth about. Careful, almost reverent. Evelyn followed a few steps behind without even deciding to. Scout's cry was still vibrating in her bones. Whatever was in that bag had to matter, or he wouldn't have fought like that. At the tailgate, Justice set the duffel down. Up close, it looked even more ordinary. Canvas worn smooth in places, scuffed in others. Faded navy, the kind of color you get after too many summers in the back of a pickup. One corner was stained a darker shade, as if it had been set down on something wet and never fully dried. Harper joined him, wiping dust off her hands. Evelyn, Jake, Max, and Frankie formed a loose half-circle around the truck. "Could be nothing," Frankie said, more to himself than to anyone else. "We've had people stash all kinds of trash out here. Old gear, clothes, drug stuff." Justice rested his fingers on the zipper pull. It was cool under his hand, gritty with sand. Deep down, he knew it wasn't going to be nothing. He pulled. The zipper teeth scraped open, metal on metal, the sound oddly loud in the quiet canyon. When the bag's mouth loosened, a breath of air rose. Faint detergent, dried pine. Something that felt like the echo of a home. The first glimpse inside made Harper's hand fly to her mouth. "Is that?" Justice folded the sides back. They had all braced for food, or trash, or something dangerous. What they saw instead reached past every expectation and went straight for their hearts. On top lay a square of fabric, not store-bought, a hand-sewn bandana frayed at the edges. The cloth was sun-faded, but you could still see the pattern. Little stitched outlines of mountains and a small paw print, done in thread that wandered a bit, like whoever made it was learning as they went. In one corner, clumsy but proud, a name. Scout. Evelyn let out a sharp, involuntary sound, half gasp, half sob. It wasn't a horror scream. It was that shocked exhale your body makes when it recognizes love where you weren't expecting it. Under the bandana lay a notebook, soft with use, the cardboard cover bent and worn. Justice lifted it carefully. A pressed wildflower fell out and landed on the truck bed, brittle petals still holding a ghost of color. Inside the notebook, the handwriting was tight and neat. Page after page of trail notes, little sketches of canyon walls, lists of bird calls. Here and there, the same name appeared in the margins, mixed in with gear lists and weather reports. Lauren Harris. Max swallowed. "It's someone's hiking journal," he said, voice thin. Justice nodded. His fingers brushed past a line where Lauren had written about finding a tiny spotted kitten under the juniper near mile marker 3. And next to it, in the margin, was a quick sketch of a bobcat kitten curled under a branch, ears too big for its head. Below the journal were photos, printed on cheap glossy paper, edges curled from being carried and handled. He set them in a row on the tailgate. The first showed a backyard edged with potted plants. In the center, a woman in her 30s sat on a lawn chair, her hair pulled back, a blanket over her knees. In her lap, small but unmistakable, was Scout as a young bobcat, spots brighter, eyes enormous. His paw was resting on her hand as if that was the most natural thing in the world. In another picture, the same woman sat on a rock near a trail sign, a bandana tied loosely around her neck, the same pattern as the one in the bag. Scout was beside her, a little older now, staring at her with a kind of fierce focus animals reserve for the people who mean everything. Evelyn stared at those images and felt her throat tighten. There was a softness there, a kindness, an obvious love that didn't fit into the neat boxes we usually keep between wild and domestic. Whatever their story was, It had not been simple. Frankie pointed at a photo where the woman wore a hospital bracelet on her wrist, visible just under the cuff of her sleeve. Scout lay at her feet on a couch, his head resting near her ankle, eyes half closed but alert. "Is that oncology?" he asked quietly, seeing the glimpse of the bracelet logo. Harper didn't answer out loud, but her face did. Justice carefully dug deeper into the bag. His fingers brushed cool plastic. He pulled out a hospital wristband, the printing faded but still legible. Harris, Lauren. A date from 3 years earlier, a barcode long past scanning. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. It's a particular kind of shock, realizing that what you're holding in your hands isn't just equipment or trash, but the remains of a life, someone's last months. Their careful attempts to hold on to joy through trail notes and stitched cloth, even as their body unraveled. Evelyn's eyes burned. She thought of the box in her closet, the hospital bracelets she'd secretly tucked into an old shoebox when her husband passed. She had never known what to do with them. Throwing them away felt wrong. Keeping them felt heavy. So they sat in the dark, holding a story she hadn't dared to revisit. Looking at Lauren's things, she realized she wasn't the only one who had done that. We are, all of us, little archives of loyalty. Harper reached in again and pulled out a small metal tag on a keyring. One side had the outline of a bobcat etched into it. The other side held a single word, stamped a little crooked. Brave. Max's shoulders shook. He carried this bag all this way, he whispered, looking back down the trail, imagining Scout dragging the weight mile after mile through sand and stone. Justice let the thought settle. This wasn't just a bobcat staying near some random human scent. This was a wild animal holding on to the physical remains of a bond that had shaped his entire life. In a way, Scout had done what so many of us do after we lose someone. He found an object that still smelled like them, still felt like them, and refused to let go. There is a quiet, powerful kind of love in that. Not the romantic kind from fairy tales, not the neat moral stories with easy lessons. This was messy, complicated, soulful loyalty. The kind that carries a duffel bag through a canyon until your paws bleed. Harper drew a slow breath. "We need to know who she was," she said, touching the edge of a photo. "And what happened to her?" Justice nodded. He flipped the journal to the inside back cover, hoping for something, anything that might guide them. There, written in the same careful hand, was a partial address, smudged but readable enough. A street name on the outskirts of a small mill town an hour away. No last message, no explanation, just an anchor point tying this crying bobcat to a human home. Evelyn watched Scout from where he lay under Harper's care now, breathing shallow but steady. Without the bag, he looked smaller somehow, not less wild, just exposed. Like someone who's had their last photograph taken away. If you've ever seen an animal sit at the door after their person leaves, or pace a window they don't understand, you know this feeling. Love doesn't care whether you walk on 2 legs or 4. It just knows when something is missing. For a moment, Pine Hollow held them all in a shared silence. People, bobcat, and the invisible presence of a woman whose handwriting still smelled faintly of laundry soap and pine. Justice closed the journal gently. "This isn't just a wildlife case anymore," he said softly. "We owe it to both of them to finish the story." In the next part of this heartwarming story, they'll drive out to the address in the back of that notebook. They'll knock on a door that has been waiting for news without knowing it. And they'll meet someone who has lived with his own heavy bag of grief, wondering what became of his daughter's wild companion. If your chest feels a little full right now, from love, from memories, from that strange mix of sadness and hope, you're welcome to sit with that for a breath or two. This isn't a rush. Stories like this work slowly. When you're ready, we'll go with them to the house that time tried to stop and see how one bobcat's loyalty brings a human family back to life in a way they never expected. By the time they turned off the highway and onto the narrow road toward the address in Lauren's journal, the day had taken on that washed-out afternoon light that makes everything look a little older than it is. Justice drove. Harper watched the GPS. Evelyn sat in the back seat, the journal in her lap, fingers resting lightly on its worn cover. No one played music. The only sounds were the hum of the tires and the occasional rattle from the wildlife crate in the back, where Scout lay sedated, breathing slowly, somewhere between the past and whatever came next. They passed the remains of an old lumber mill, all rust and broken windows, then a row of modest houses scattered along the edge of town. Mailboxes leaned at angles. A plastic tricycle lay overturned in one yard, bleached nearly white by the sun. Clothes flapped on a line in another. Life, carrying on. Then the GPS beeped once. "There," Harper murmured. The house at the end of the gravel drive wasn't abandoned, but it had that look some homes get when they've lost a person and never quite adjusted. The paint was peeling in spots. The flower beds out front were mostly soil and stubborn weeds, with a few brave marigolds hanging on. A wooden ramp led up to the front porch, its railings faded from bright stain to quiet gray. Justice parked and cut the engine. For a moment, nobody moved. "Take your time," he said softly. "We don't know what we're walking into." Evelyn swallowed. She thought of how she would feel if strangers showed up at her door holding her husband's watch, or his old thermos, how it would yank the past into the present in a single, merciless second. "Maybe we're walking into something that needs to move," she said, surprising herself with her own words. Justice nodded once, grateful for the reminder. They walked up the ramp together. The boards creaked under their weight, a tired, familiar sound. Justice took off his hat and knocked. For a moment, there was only the rustle of trees and the distant hum of a lawnmower on another street. Then came the soft drag of footsteps on hardwood. The door opened a crack, then wider. A man stood there, older, shoulders a little rounded from years of work and worry. His eyes went first to the uniform, then to Harper's medic vest, then to Evelyn's face. You could see him sorting through possibilities in an instant. Bad news, wrong address, neighbor trouble. "We're looking for Charles Harris," Justice said gently. "Charlie?" "That's me," the man answered, voice rough. "What's this about?" Justice didn't reach for paperwork. He reached for the journal. "We found some things in Pine Hollow," he said. "We think they might belong to someone you know." At the name of the canyon, something flickered behind Charlie's eyes, but it was when he saw the journal cover that his hand moved to the doorframe, steadying himself. Justice held it out. Charlie reached with fingers that trembled just enough to make the pages whisper. He turned it over, tracing the worn cardboard with his thumb, then opened to the first page. There in careful handwriting was the name he hadn't seen inked fresh in years. Lauren Elaine Harris. Charlie's face changed. Not in a dramatic way, just a slow, breaking softness that started around his mouth and moved outward. You found it," he whispered. "Her trail book." His other hand came up to his chest, as if his ribs needed help holding together. "Mr. Harris," Harper said quietly, "we'd like to talk to you about your daughter." "And about a bobcat named Scout." The porch seemed to tilt for a heartbeat. Charlie blinked hard, eyes shining. He stepped back and held the door open. "Come in," he said. "Please." Inside, the house felt like it had stopped moving on the day Lauren left. The couch cushions were a little worn, but perfectly aligned. A TV remote sat on the coffee table, next to a mug that looked like it hadn't been used in a long time, but still had a coaster under it like someone cared about the furniture. Family photos lined a shelf. A young woman on a trail. The same woman in a hospital gown smiling bravely. A tiny bobcat curled on a fleece blanket, speckled fur and oversized paws. Evelyn's gaze snagged on that last one. Scout, younger, softer, staring into the camera with those same golden eyes, but without the weight of everything he'd carried since. Charlie gestured them toward the living room, then paused, looking at the journal again.
She took this everywhere, he said quietly. Every time her scans came back worse, she'd plan a shorter hike and pretend it didn't matter. He gave a small, helpless shrug. Just different views, right? There was kindness in the way he said it. Love, too. That kind of loyalty that stays even when the route keeps getting shorter. Justice sat on the edge of a chair, hat in his lap. "We found the journal in a duffel bag," he said, "out in the canyon." Charlie's eyes flicked up. "A navy bag?" he asked. "With a torn strap?" "Yes, sir." A breath left him in a quiet rush. "I thought it was gone for good," he murmured. "It disappeared with him." Harper leaned forward slightly. "With Scout?" He nodded. Lauren rescued him years ago. She found him under a fallen juniper. Someone had shot his mother. He was too young to be out there alone. He smiled faintly at the memory, and for a moment, you could almost see Lauren standing there beside him. Dusty boots, determined jaw, eyes bright with that brand of stubborn kindness some people carry naturally. "She called me from the trailhead," he went on. "Dad, don't be mad, but I'm bringing home a friend." He shook his head. "I told her you can't just move a bobcat into the guest room." She brought him anyway. There was no point in pretending it had been a perfect choice. Charlie didn't try. He told the truth, the way older folks do when they're done polishing the past. "We tried to do the right thing," he said. "Called wildlife rehab, called a sanctuary up north. They were full. They told us not to get attached." He let out a dry, humorless breath. "Too late." Scout grew. So did the bond. Lauren sat on the floor, teaching him to take food from a dish instead of from her fingers. She stitched that little bandana on the days when Hemo took too much out of her to walk. She lay on the couch, a blanket over her legs, while he slept pressed against the curve of her feet, eyes always half open, watching. He knew when she was having a bad day, Charlie said. On the good days, he'd pace by the door, ready to go out in the yard, watch birds, pretend he was king of some bigger place. On the bad days, he wouldn't leave her side. Evelyn understood that. She'd seen dogs curl up under hospital beds and refuse to move. She'd seen cats walk the length of a hospice room and settle on the one lap that needed them the most. Love, in all its forms, has a way of knowing where to sit. When she got worse, Charlie continued, I kept telling her we'd find a proper sanctuary, a place with space, other bobcats, real sky. His voice roughened. She said she wanted that for him too. Said he deserved the whole desert, not just our backyard. He looked down at the journal, thumb rubbing the edge of a page. Then one morning, she was gone. The hospital called, and by the time I got home that night, so were Scout and the bag. The room was very quiet. I thought maybe he'd wandered off and, you know. He lifted a shoulder, not needing to finish the sentence. I walked the washes for weeks, left food cold until my voice gave out. Nothing. For years, that was the story. Lauren had died. Scout had vanished. The duffel with her last bits of handwriting and fabric and photographs had been swallowed by the land. And now you're telling me, Charlie said slowly, that he didn't die out there. He found her bag, and he held on to it. All this time. Justice's voice was soft. He dragged it across miles of rock and sand, he said. Guarded it like it was his own heartbeat. When we tried to take it, he cried like you'd expect a person to cry. Charlie closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they shone. But there was a different light there now, not just grief. Something like awe. That sounds like her, he whispered. Stubborn to the end. He sank onto the edge of the couch. His hand trembled as he reached for one of the photos Justice had brought in. Lauren, Scout, the bandana. A whole story in one snapshot. You don't often think of a bobcat as a messenger, as a bearer of love across years and distance. But sitting there, in that quiet living room where time had been stuck since Lauren left, Scout's journey started to look like an inspirational story in its own right. Not a fairy tale with a perfect happy ever after, but a real, soulful tale about kindness, love, and loyalty, refusing to quit. Evelyn watched Charlie and thought about her own daughter, about the phone calls she'd let ring, the conversations she'd cut short because they felt too complicated. She realized that, in her own way, she'd let their relationship sit like this house, mostly intact but unmoving, dust settling on words left unsaid. If a wild bobcat could carry someone's memory across a rough landscape for years, the least she could do, she thought, was carry a simple, "I miss you," across a phone line. "Mr. Harris," Harper said gently, "Scout is alive. He's at our center right now, resting. He's weak, but he made it. We wanted you to know." Charlie's shoulders shook once, a small, contained tremor. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand. "Can I see him?" he asked. "Not to bring him back here, I know better, just to tell him thank you for staying with her when I couldn't." Justice nodded. "We were hoping you'd come," he said. On their way out, Charlie paused on the porch. He glanced up at the sky, then toward the outline of distant hills. "The morning Scout disappeared," he said quietly. "I stood right here and asked the land to take care of him. Didn't know who I was talking to. Just hoped somebody was listening." He gave a small, weary smile. "Looks like somebody was." There's a kind of prayer that doesn't use religious language. It just sounds like a person talking to the air, asking for mercy. For Quinn, for Lauren, for Scout, for anyone carrying a heavy bag. Sometimes the answers take a long time winding their way back. As they walked down the ramp, Evelyn slipped her phone from her pocket. She didn't do anything with it yet, just moved her daughter's name to the top of her favorites list. A tiny act, almost invisible. But in her world, it felt as big as a bobcat dragging a duffel through the desert. In the next, he'll stand on one side of the enclosure, Scout on the other, and they'll both have to decide what it means to say goodbye in a way that honors love instead of fear. If you've ever, take a breath. Be gentle with that part of you. When you're ready, we'll go with them to the place where wild animals heal and see how one bobcat helps a grieving father finally let the story move forward. By the time Scout was settled into a quiet recovery stall at the Wildlife Center, the story felt almost complete. Almost. He lay. Charlie sat close by, one hand resting on his own knee, as if he were holding himself in place. Evelyn stood a little farther back, giving them room, the journal tucked under her arm. For a while, everyone focused on the present. Scout alive, Charlie reunited with a piece of his daughter. The duffel emptied and neatly arranged on a stainless steel table. Bandana, photos, key tag, hospital band, and the journal, worn and soulful, carries the bones of an inspirational story inside its pages. It was Harper who noticed first. She had opened to the last entries, scanning quietly while the room hummed with the sounds of machines and soft voices. At the very end of the notebook, where the final page should have been, there was only a ragged edge. Paper fibers torn, not neatly cut. Whatever had been written there was gone. "That's strange," she murmured, tracing the torn binding with a fingertip. Justice looked over. "What is it?" "Last page is missing," she said. "The rest of the journal is intact." "Why rip out the end?" Charlie's head turned slowly, as if drawn by an invisible thread. "She wrote something the night before they took her back to the hospital," he said. "Sat at the kitchen table, this thing open in front of her. Her hand was shaking, but she finished the page." His voice thinned. "I asked her what it was. She said, 'Just in case, Dad.'" He'd never read it. He'd told himself it was private, sacred. And then one day, it was gone. Justice felt the absence like a physical weight. In stories like this, the last page matters. It's where the scattered feelings come together, where love and loyalty and fear try to put themselves into words. Whatever Lauren had written, she'd meant for someone to see it after she was gone. And now, it was missing. Could have fallen out, Frankie offered. Harper shook her head. Bindings torn, that page was pulled. The room grew quiet in a different way. Not the hush of grief this time, but the stillness of questions hanging in the air. Later that afternoon, Justice sat at his desk in the small ranger office attached to the center. The journal opened before him. He flipped again through the earlier entries, looking for anything that might help. Halfway through, pressed between pages, he found a folded incident report that wasn't his. It was a field note from another ranger, filed about a year earlier. Transient male seen camping illegally near Pine Hollow, in possession of a Navy duffel, possible abandoned property. There was a brief description of the man, his old pickup, and one small detail tacked on to the end. Said he found the bag under a juniper, but left it when a bobcat wouldn't let him close. Justice stared at that line. The land had been trying to tell this story for a long time. He closed the journal and picked up his keys. The rest stop sat at the edge of the interstate, the kind of place most people hurried through without really seeing. Trucks idled, a soda machine hummed. A few picnic tables provided shade for travelers who couldn't quite make it to the next town. On the far side of the lot was an older pickup truck, paint faded, bed full of odds and ends. A man sat on the curb nearby, elbows on his knees, watching a crow hop from one trash can to another. "Name's Coda, right?" Justice asked, walking up slowly. The man started, then squinted. "Depends who's asking. Ranger Cole. We talked, or my partner did, about a year back. Navy duffel, bobcat, you couldn't get near." Something in Coda's shoulders sagged. "That cat almost took my hand off," he muttered. "Didn't matter what I did. The bag wasn't worth that kind of trouble." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a battered wallet. From behind a few creased receipts and a folded dollar bill, he slid out a single piece of paper, worn soft at the edges from being handled. "I did keep this," he said, avoiding Justice's eyes. "It was the only thing the wind hadn't ruined. I don't know why I took it. Guess I liked the handwriting." Justice accepted the page carefully. The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly smeared, but the words were still there. Back at the center, they gathered in a small room off the main hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly. Through the open door, Scout Stall was visible, his chest rising and falling in a slow, tired rhythm. Charlie sat with the journal balanced on his knee. Evelyn stood beside him. Harper and Justice leaned against the far wall, giving him space. Justice handed him the missing page. Charlie unfolded it like something fragile and holy. The handwriting was shakier than in earlier entries, letters slanted, lines drifting, but it was Lauren's, unmistakably. He cleared his throat and began to read, voice catching on the first words. "Dad," it began, "if you're reading this, it means my body finally did what everyone said it would." He stopped, swallowing hard, then continued. "I don't want you to feel guilty for whatever happens next with Scout. I know you're going to worry yourself sick about doing the right thing. That's what you do. But I need you to know what I'm asking for." Her words moved slowly down the page, simple and clear. She wrote about the nights Scout slept pressed against her legs, his breathing steady when hers wasn't. She wrote about how his presence had turned sterile hospital months into something almost bearable. She wrote about kindness and loyalty in that plain way people use when they're too tired for poetry. Then came the part that mattered most.
"Please don't keep him in the house for me,"
she wrote.
"Don't let your love for me turn into a cage for him. He's a bobcat."
He deserves sky and wind and places to climb. If I'm not here to sit with him on the porch, let him go where he can be what he was born to be. She paused just once to make a small joke about Scout probably being bossy with other bobcats, then continued.
"If there's a sanctuary that will take him, a good one, with people who understand animals and treat them with kindness, I want you to let him go there.
Even if it hurts, especially if it hurts. Don't hold on because you're scared to be alone. Letting go can be a way of loving too." The last line was shakier than the rest, as if her strength had started to give out. "Love isn't just staying," she wrote. "Sometimes it's opening the gate." By the time Charlie finished, the room felt different. It wasn't dramatic. No one cried out.
It was more like the quiet shift when a storm finally breaks and the pressure drops. The missing words had slid back into place, and with them came a kind of permission.
Charlie stared at the page for a long moment, thumb brushing the edge as if he could touch his daughter's hand through the ink.
I thought loving her meant holding on to everything,
He said finally. The bed, the room, the photos. The idea that Scout belonged here because she had. He shook his head slowly. Never thought she'd be the one telling me it's okay to let things move. Harper spoke softly.
You loved her well, she said. You did the best you could with what you knew then.
Then she glanced toward Scout's stall.
Now we know more. About him, about what she wanted.
Justice felt something settle inside himself too.
Later that night, he sat alone in his truck in the dark parking lot, a single overhead light casting a soft circle on the dashboard. On the passenger seat lay 2 documents, the old flood report he'd carried for years, and a photocopy of Lauren's page. One represented the life he hadn't been able to save, a weight he'd worn like penance.
The other represented a chance to honor someone's wishes while they still had time.
He stared at them both, then picked up the report and folded it one last time.
His fingers hovered over the glove compartment, then stopped. Instead of tucking it back in, he slid it into a manila folder with other archived cases. Important, yes, but not something he needed to drive around with anymore.
Lauren's page he slipped into the sun visor, where he knew he'd see it every time he flipped it down against the glare. Love isn't just staying. Sometimes it's opening the gate. The next morning, he brought Charlie and Harper into the small break room. Over coffee that had been sitting on the warmer a little too long, they talked about what came next. They didn't talk in circles.
They didn't turn it into a debate about right and wrong. They talked instead about balance,
About the kindness that had led Lauren to bring Scout home in the first place. About the loyalty that had kept him at her side. About the emotions that made Charlie keep the house frozen in place. And the same emotions are now asking him to set something free. They also talked honestly about wild animals as pets.
We bend the rules sometimes when someone we love is suffering,
Harper said. We let a bobcat sleep on the couch. We bring a raccoon kit into the laundry room. We tell ourselves it's temporary or just this once. There's love in that, Justice added. But there's also a point where love turns into control without meaning to, where our need not to lose someone or something keeps them smaller than they're meant to be. Charlie listened, eyes on his coffee, then nodded. I can't bring my girl back, he said, but I can listen to what she asks. If there's a place that'll let him be a bobcat and not just the last piece of my life with her, then that's where he should go. In that moment, the path forward became clear. Not because anyone forced a decision, not because rules demanded it, but because a father chose to trust his daughter's last request more than his fear. In the next part of this heartwarming story, that choice will lead them to High Mesa Sanctuary, a stretch of land where the sky is wide, the rocks are high, and animals like Scout get a second chance at being themselves. If you've ever held on tight because you were scared of what would happen if you let go, you're not alone.
Maybe there's a page in your own story that you've been too afraid to read, or a gate you've been afraid to open.
For now, it's enough just to know that letting go doesn't erase love. Sometimes, it's how love proves it was real all along. When you're ready, we'll make that drive together and see what freedom looks like for a bobcat who carried a bag of memories farther than anyone imagined. The road to High Mesa Sanctuary climbed the way some decisions do, slowly at first, then all at once. The truck carried Scout in a padded transport crate, his breathing steady now, eyes clearer but still watchful. Behind him, in a follow car, rode Charlie and Evelyn. Justice led the way, the windshield framing a sky that seemed to get wider with every mile. If Pine Hollow felt like a sheltered tunnel, High Mesa felt like the world exhaling. At the sanctuary gate, a simple wooden sign swung in the breeze. No big logos, just a name and a line carved beneath it that someone must have added by hand. For those who lost their place. A woman from the sanctuary, Doctor.
Aurora Lane met them in the parking area. She didn't rush.
She walked up to the crate and simply stood for a moment, letting Scout smell the air around her, then the back of her hand, giving him the choice to come closer or stay back.
That's Scout,
Harper said, keeping her voice low.
He's been living like something in between. Not quite wild, not quite tame.
Aurora nodded as if she'd met that story before in other forms.
We'll help him remember how to be what he is,
she said,
without erasing where he's been.
They wheeled the crate along a packed dirt path.
The sanctuary unfolded around them in quiet layers, not cages stacked in rows, but broad, carefully arranged spaces that blended into the land. To their left, a bobcat with a missing hind leg lay on a flat rock, eyes half closed, tail flicking lazily. A sign near the fence simply read, "Found in a trap."
10 years old, like sun and silence.
Farther on, a coyote trotted along a ridgeline inside a large enclosure, stopping every few steps to sniff, mark, and move on. Aurora mentioned he'd once lived off campground scraps and parking lot handouts. We had to teach him that food doesn't always come in crinkly wrappers, she said, a faint smile in her voice. Humans meant kindness, but it made survival confusing.
Now he hunts again. Takes time.
That was the lesson of this place. Kindness, love, and loyalty could go wrong without meaning to.
But they could also be redirected, turned back into something that worked with nature instead of against it.
They reached Scout's new space, a transitional habitat tucked against a natural rock face. It wasn't a fairy tale forest or a zoo exhibit. It was honest land. Scrub, boulders, a few twisted junipers, a shallow ravine where water sometimes ran after rain.
This is where he'll start,
Aurora explained.
It's enough room to move, to hide, to climb. Once he's stronger, we can consider connecting it to the larger bobcat range.
Justice and Harper lifted the crate right up to the gate. For a moment, nobody opened anything. They just stood and looked. You could feel the weight of it.
All the miles Scout had dragged that bag. All the nights he'd curled around reminders of a home that was half wild, half human.
All the love that had flowed through that house,
then through the canyon,
and now here,
into this wide, quiet space. Aurora unlatched the crate door and stepped back. At first, Scout didn't move. He stayed crouched, muscles tense, eyes flicking between the open world and the familiar shadows of the crate. Change, even when it's good, can feel like a cliff edge. Then a breeze moved across the enclosure, carrying the dry, clean scent of rock and sage and something else. Other bobcats, faint but present, a life he hadn't lived yet. Scout lifted his head, nose working. He eased forward one careful step, then another. His paws touched red earth. He paused, weight half in, half out of his traveling box, and glanced back once, almost reflexively, as if checking whether the old life would follow. It didn't. He stepped fully into the enclosure. His body language shifted almost immediately. He lowered his head and began to move along the fence, sniffing posts, rubbing his cheek against a weathered log, leaving his scent as if writing his name in a language older than any journal.
This is what bobcats do,
Aurora said softly.
They claim, they explore,
they find edges. They're drawn to the in-between, where forest meets open ground, where rock meets grass. She pointed gently with her chin, not wanting to distract him.
See his tail? That slow, curious twitch? That's not fear, that's awareness.
Charlie stepped closer to the fence, his hands curled into the mesh for a moment, not pulling, just holding on. Scout paused and looked over. Their eyes met. For a second, the years seemed to fall away. Scout on a living room rug. Scout on a porch step. Scout pressing his head against a couch cushion because Lauren's feet were there. He walked toward Charlie, not rushing, not flinching, just moving with that quiet bobcat grace, the same way he had padded through Lauren's life, now padding through this new chapter. He stopped a foot from the fence and lowered his head, pressing his forehead lightly against the wire. Charlie mirrored the gesture, placing his palm there. No fanfare, no speeches, just skin and fur separated by a thin bit of metal, and all the unspoken thank yous hanging between them. "Hey, buddy," Charlie whispered. "You did well. Better than I ever did, I think." Scout blinked slowly, his whiskers flicked. Then he drew in a deep breath and turned, gaze sliding past Charlie toward the rock face. He saw a ledge above, not high, but higher than a couch arm, higher than a backyard step. Something in his muscles remembered. He crouched, weight shifting back. Then with a single strong push, he leapt. The first jump wasn't perfect. He scrambled a little on the rock, claws catching, hind legs bunching awkwardly. Years of indoor corners and flat floors had left their mark, but he made it. He stood on the ledge, chest rising and falling, looking out over his new terrain. Evelyn felt something in her chest answer that image. The sight of a tired heart rediscovering what it was built for can do that to you. Even if your climbing looks more like finally walking around the block or picking up a forgotten hobby than leaping onto a rock. Over the next few weeks, Scout's life unfolded in small, steady moments. Aurora sent updates. An email with a photo of him stretched full length on a warm stone at dawn, eyes half closed in real, unguarded rest. A short video of him stalking a rabbit-shaped toy on a tether line, muscles working in ways they hadn't in years. A note about the first time he used a natural rock crevice as a den, instead of curling in the corner by the fence.
He ignored the blanket last night, one message read. Choose the open sky instead. That's a big step.
With each update, you could see the shift from survival to living. His coat grew glossier. His movements became less hesitant. The tight, desperate energy he'd carried in Pine Hollow eased into something truer to his species. Alert, yes, but not constantly braced for loss. This is what healing often looks like, in animals and in people. Not a sudden, cinematic transformation, but a series of small choices. To taste new food, to explore new space, to trust a quiet night, to loosen the grip on the old jacket, the old bag, the old story. For Charlie, High Mesa became something like a second grave and a second chapel, a place where he could remember Lauren without feeling trapped by the walls of her room. He visited a few times, never demanding Scout come to the fence, never shaking treats or calling his name like a house pet. He just sat on a bench, hands on his knees, watching a bobcat navigate boulders and shrubs with growing confidence. Sometimes, Scout would glance his way. Sometimes he wouldn't. Either way, it was all right. "He doesn't need me to survive anymore," Charlie said once, half to himself, half to Evelyn. That was the point, wasn't it? Lauren needed him. He needed her. Now he just needs Sky. Evelyn took that in. On the drive home, she thought about the people in her life she'd tried to keep on the porch, so to speak. Close, safe, fixed in place where she could check on them. She realized that real love might sometimes mean letting them climb their own rocks, even if it meant she saw a little less of them. High Mesa wasn't just a sanctuary for animals. It was a mirror held up gently to the humans who came there, asking quiet questions. What part of you has been living in a crate too long? Where might you need more sky, more room, more to? If you've ever felt like your heart forgot how to be itself after a loss, if you've ever felt caught between who you were and who you're supposed to be now, you might understand what Scout was going through on those rocks, and you might find a little hope in the way he adapted. In the final part of this heartwarming moral story, we'll step a little further into the future. We'll see how this bobcat's journey ripples back into the lives of Evelyn, Charlie, Justice, and even the small town that heard about the crying bobcat with the bag. We'll talk about what lingers after the dust settles, the kindness, the love, the loyalty that stay, even once the bag itself is gone. For now, you can take one slow breath and picture High Mesa in your mind. Wide sky, honest earth, a bobcat standing on a rock he had to relearn how to reach. When you're ready, we'll move into the last chapter of this inspirational story and see how a wild heart, once healed, helps human hearts find their way home too.
Long after the last echo of Scout's cries faded from Pine Hollow, the canyon kept its quiet. The pines still swayed.
The creek bed still cradled its thin line of water after rain. To anyone just passing through, it looked like any other rugged corner of the American West. But for a handful of people, and for one bobcat learning the shape of his own freedom, nothing was quite the same.
Up on High Mesa, mornings began with a soft band of light spilling over the rocks. Scout had found his routines again, but they were different now.
He patrolled the edges of his enclosure with a calm, economical grace. He practiced short bursts of speed, stopped, listened, and moved on the way wild bobcats are meant to. He chose rock shelves over blankets. He slept under the open sky more nights than not. Every so often he would pause on a ridge and look out toward the hazy line of far-off hills.
Whatever he carried inside him, all that love and loyalty and memory, it seemed to sit more easily now. Not as a weight, but as part of his wildness. Down in town, the story of the crying bobcat and the bag took on a life of its own. It wasn't told like a fairy tale, not exactly. People didn't turn Scout into a cartoon hero. They told it the way you talk about a neighbor who did something quietly extraordinary. A small local paper ran a piece called "The Bobcat Who Wouldn't Let Go." The reporter focused not on drama, but on the strange, heartwarming mix of kindness and grief at the center of it all. A woman who stitched a bandana and wrote trail notes between treatments. A bobcat who carried her memory across miles of stone. A father who finally honored his daughter's last request, even when it hurt. In hardware stores and coffee shops, folks shook their heads and said things like, "Can you imagine dragging a bag that far?" Or, "Animals feel more than we give them credit for." A neighbor of Charlie's, who had never met Lauren, left a small pot of marigolds on his porch with a simple note. For her, for him, for you. No lecture, no moral is spelled out, just a gentle acknowledgement that some stories change the air they move through. Evelyn felt that change most on ordinary days. Months after Pine Hollow, she sat at her kitchen table one morning with a cup of coffee and her tablet. The sanctuary had posted a short update. Scout perched high on a rock, tail hanging loose, eyes half closed, in that particular contentment only animals seem to achieve. The caption mentioned how he'd stopped circling the fence at night. Instead, he lay under the stars and slept deeply. Watching that, Evelyn felt a quiet easing inside herself. She'd finally called her daughter. The first conversation had been messy. Awkward pauses, long silences, tears that came from nowhere. But they'd kept talking, sometimes once a week, sometimes once a month. They weren't trying to go back to who they'd been before all the misunderstandings and miles. They were trying to be who they were now, with all the dents and tenderness time had given them. In a small way, Scout had given her permission to do that. If a bobcat could learn to loosen his grip on a bag and still be loyal to the love that filled it, maybe she could loosen her grip on old grievances and still be loyal to the bond underneath. Justice changed the way he carried the past, too. The old flood report didn't ride in his glove box anymore. It lived in a file where it belonged, part of his history, not his identity. In its place, tucked behind his visor, he kept a photocopy of Lauren's last page. On long drives between canyons and trailheads, he'd flip the visor down, read the line about opening the gate, and let the words sit with him. When he came across well-meaning folks who treated wild animals like house pets, he spoke a little differently than before. Less anger, more understanding. He talked about emotions and intentions, about the difference between love that holds close and love that lets go. He mentioned Scout sometimes, not as an exhibit, but as a reminder that even moral stories can be complicated. No villains, just people trying to ease someone's pain the only way they know how. Charlie still visited High Mesa from time to time. The first few trips, he stayed for hours, watching Scout move through his new world. Later, his visits got shorter. Not because he loved the bobcat less, but because he trusted more. Trusted Lauren's request, trusted the sanctuary, trusted Scout's own instincts. He started planting things again back home.
The flower beds that had sat mostly bare for years now held sturdy plants that could handle the weather.
He told a neighbor, almost offhand, "Feels good to see something grow on purpose." That's what this whole story left behind, really. Not just a set of dramatic events in a canyon, but a series of slow-growing changes.
A man who forgave himself enough to sleep. A father who learned that letting go can be an act of love. A woman who picked up the phone. A young man who chose to volunteer at a rehab center instead of ignoring the wild.
And a bobcat who carried a bag of memories far enough to teach a few human hearts how to be a little more honest, a little more soulful.
It's easy, when life hurts, to look for big, bright, inspirational stories that promise a neat, happy ending. But most of the heartwarming stories that actually stay with us are quieter. They sound like this one. Rough around the edges, full of flawed decisions and deep emotions, and small acts of kindness that add up over time.
They don't tell us what to think. They just sit beside us and whisper, "Look, love can survive a lot. So can you."
This bobcat didn't fix anyone's life.
He didn't erase grief. What he did was more subtle, and in some ways more powerful.
He turned his own loyalty into a mirror. When people looked at him clinging to that duffel, they saw their own jackets, their own boxes of old letters, their own tucked-away hospital bracelets.
They saw the ways they'd tried to keep the past alive, and the ways the past had kept them from fully living. And when they saw him finally leap onto that rock at High Mesa, leaving the bag behind, but not the love that filled it,
they saw a version of themselves they maybe hadn't believed in for a while. A version that could be hurt and still happy, scarred and still moving toward the open sky. As we close this chapter, I'd like to gently turn the question toward you.
Is there something you've been holding on to the way Scout held that bag? An object, a habit,
A story about yourself that once kept you company, but now keeps you from feeling truly free? There's no rush to answer. Just notice what comes up when you hear the question. If this bobcat's journey stirred something in you, if it brought up memories of your own kindness, love, and loyalty, or reminded you of an animal or person who walked beside you through a hard season, I invite you to sit with that for a moment. And if you feel comfortable, you can share a piece of that below. Maybe a name, or a simple, "I remember."
Those small comments often become their own quiet moral stories, helping someone else feel less alone. If this soulful, gentle story of a wild heart meant something to you, it would help a lot if you'd tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.
This channel is a home for heartwarming stories like this. Not perfect fairy tales, but real moments where humans and wild creatures meet in ways that heal us a little. And if you'd like to go one step further, you can use Super Thanks or any donate option you see to help support rescue work and sanctuaries that care for injured and displaced wildlife,
Especially bobcats and other quiet souls who need a second chance. Every bit of support, every kind share, every small act of attention is its own form of kindness.
It tells the world that these lives matter and that stories like Scout's are worth passing on.